Lake Lewis. Covers the Redskins, USA Today. Also watches the Wizards with regularity, so we'll get his thoughts on the Wizards in a little bit. Lake, let's start with the NFC and the football stuff. How you doing?
What's going on, Josh? Appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you coming on. So I'm looking over the draft, and my initial reaction is that many times in the draft, teams tell you what they value, what their philosophy is from a draft. And the two teams I feel that came out of the four NFC East teams that had the best drafts to me were the Eagles and the Redskins, because I feel those two teams have genuinely prepared themselves to play those 6 NFC East games, whereas the other two teams, the Giants and the Cowboys, made some picks that may have some help at certain areas, but I don't think genuinely prepare them for those 6 games.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, the Cowboys, took some cornerbacks where they need some help there. I'm not sure about Taco Charlton with them at this point, but we'll see how that plays itself out. Giants took a tight end that's very athletic, and, that's been a position for them that's kind of been, hit or miss over the past several years. So that could help them. But when you look at the Eagles and you look at the Redskins, they didn't just have a top-heavy draft. I mean, they've got some value late in the the rounds, and I think that both those teams have tremendously helped themselves and possibly put themselves in position to compete, with the Giants and the Cowboys who won the division last year. And in the case of the Redskins, I mean, they're a year removed from winning that division. So it's not as if, and they had a winning record last year, missed the playoffs, losing that last game to the Giants. So it's not like they fell on, hard times. I think that they've gotten some players in there that should help right away, immediate contributions from Jonathan Allen. And then I think Ryan Anderson, both those guys come from Alabama. It appears that, even with the Eagles, they went the winner route. They went by getting Barnett. You got a linebacker that's coming from the SEC as well, from Tennessee. It just seems like they went after guys that were battle-tested, and I think they're going to get instant dividends for those players.
To me, the guy who is the most valuable pick for the Redskins in this draft is Samaje Perine, because I saw this guy at Oklahoma. He doesn't fumble the ball. He utilizes his blocks. He's a patient runner. He makes the most out of every carry he gets. And that's the kind of running back the Redskins haven't had in a while.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, Rob Kelly came in last year, and, he actually was a guy that I remember going back to minicamp, rookie minicamp for that matter. And I'm like, who's this kid from Tulane? He looks like he has some potential. And things just fell into place for him. Matt Jones, who was the incumbent starter going into the season, for whatever reason, he didn't grab the bull by the horns, and he didn't, claim the job. And, it opened up an opportunity for Rob Kelly. I think if you look at Samaje Perine, I think if you look at him and you see the kind of runner he is, I think the Redskins' whole draft, as far as the offensive side of the ball, and even their free agent signings of Terrell Pryor and Brian Quick, those guys, this team has set themselves up for red zone success. And if you look at Perine and what he did at Oklahoma, 49 touchdowns in 3 seasons. That's a lot. That means the guy has a nose for the end zone, a tough runner. He's not going to try to fake people out. He's going to run right through you. And in the NFC East, you need to be able to pick up hard yards. And I agree with you, Josh. I think he could be the steal of – I think the Redskins have a situation where they have maybe 2 or 3 guys that, Fabian Moreau, another guy that may not play right away because he's dealing with a pectoral injury during their pro day. He's a corner from UCLA. And I think he has a chance to really push Bashard Breeland if he comes back and he's healthy. So that's another steal that they got. This guy that's a second-round grade. They got him in the 3rd round. So, yeah, I mean, it's good to hear, the love for the Redskins outside this market because, I've seen some places, Josh, that had the Redskins having like the 24th or 25th best draft. And I'm like, okay, I understand people don't like the team and maybe the organization, but to tell me that this team didn't have a good draft, I would say somebody's nuts.
Yeah, see, to me, the team that if I had to pick one that I wasn't too enthused with their picks was the Cowboys, because I'm not as high on Taco Charlton as everybody else is. To me, he doesn't have a great motor. Right. To me, he's not a game wrecker as a defensive end. And you get that guy in the first round when you could have gotten a cornerback. Yeah, you get a Woozy. He's a solid cornerback. But Jordan Lewis, he's got legal issues. We may never see him. Right. Ryan Switzer, what is he? The Cole Beasley replacement, basically, someday? Marquez White. Marquez White has some of the tightest hips of any corner I've seen in this draft. And Noah Brown, he's going to be great if he's ever on the field. So I look at the Cowboys, and I see a team that drafted a bunch of what-ifs instead of a bunch of solid picks.
Yeah, I thought that Charlton I had as a second-round grade, and that was more of a mid to late second-round grade. I thought that there were some other guys that, were sitting out there that perhaps they could have taken. I don't, not to defend Dallas, but I think they kind of look at it like they had a, high first-round talent in Jalen Smith that didn't play last year. So that's their first-round pick for this year in their eyes. I'm sure that some people are going to say that, but when you have an opportunity this year to do some damage and really solidify yourself as a team, it's not just a one-year wonder, with Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott. I don't know if Dallas helped themselves. I actually think that the other three teams have gotten better through free agency and some of their drafts, but I think the Eagles and Redskins have significantly gotten better. So I do think that they're going to put pressure on the Giants and on the Cowboys. And the NFC East could be like it used to be. You're a young guy, but I can tell you what, it used to be whoever won that division was on their way to a Super Bowl run because they were already battle tested. And I think it's getting ready to get back to those days.
Talk with Lake Lewis, covers the Washington Redskins for USA Today. He's covered the Redskins for a long time. I want to ask you, the one question that came out of the draft for the Redskins was I was a little surprised that the only receiver they walked away with was Robert Davis from Georgia State, who, I think he can be a nice player. He's not really a great route runner, but he's an athlete, so he's moldable. You can make him into something. I was surprised they didn't get a receiver in like the second or third round, because when I look at them losing Deshaun Jackson and losing Pierre Garçon, they didn't just lose guys who could play receiver. They lose guys that Kirk Cousins could count on to run routes, whereas Terrell Pryor, his ceiling is as high as the stars in the sky, but he's still raw in some areas. And then Brian Quick, the name sounds nice, but it doesn't always translate on the field.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair, Josh. And a lot of people, on the outside have thought that. And I can just tell you from being with this team every day, I can tell you, I'm very enamored with what this receiving core this year could be. If they play to their potential, I've been saying it, and I'm not going to mince words, it's an upgrade from what they lost. And don't get me wrong, Deshaun Jackson, great football player, takes the top off most defenses, but that's pretty much the majority of what he does. Pierre Garçon, he's not a number one, wants to be a number one, will be a number one in San Francisco, reuniting with Kyle Shanahan. But again, the moves that were made for the red zone. And, I tell people this all the time. Deshaun Jackson didn't play in the Minnesota game last year, and the Redskins were moving up and down the field against a quote-unquote vaunted defense. A game that Pierre Garçon had an off day, the Redskins hung 45 on Green Bay. And don't get me wrong, Green Bay's defense at that time wasn't playing well. But at the end of the day, the Redskins have a prolific offense. They move the ball in between the 20s against any defense, and that's a proven fact. Problem is when they get inside the red zone, they can't score. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, when you have smaller receivers that can't really separate when there's not a lot of room, to get around, it becomes tough. And you didn't have a kind of running back that could pound the ball in there consistently. So now you address that with Pirine from Oklahoma as your back, and then you get just, a 6'4" receiver in Pryor, a 6'3" receiver in Quick. And let's not forget, the big name that people keep forgetting about is Josh Doxson, who's healthy now. He's doing everything now that they're asking him to do, so he appears to be, 90% healthy right now. This guy was a first-round draft pick. He was a guy that was considered by a lot of people to be the best receiver on the board last year. So he has the talent. Now they just have to put it all together. With Jamison Crowder and, some other pieces, Jordan Reed, of course, I think the offense can really do well. I really do.
Lake, you have your finger on the players in this league, and I want to ask you about the fact you look at these guys who had the so-called issues around them for various reasons. Your Reuben Foster, your Jabril Peppers, your Joe Mixon, your Jordan Lewis. So many of these guys, people had very, very different opinions on all of these players, and there were some teams that said, for various reasons, whether it was the injuries, even Jonathan Allen, some people didn't like his medical history. A lot of these guys, it seemed like teams were much more cautious to take some of these guys and keep letting them drop as opposed to years past. And I want to get your reaction to kind of how things played out for the guys that had the question marks around them.
Well, it's simple. It's a different time now. Social media exposes a lot of things that in the past teams could cover up, and let's just call it what it is. Teams were covering up some issues in the past, or they were hoping that, the couple PR, takes on things, they could cover up or smooth over some player situations, some of their personal situations. But now, with video showing and, people can film things or talk about it more, a lot of teams are just scared to have to deal with just the PR nightmare that comes with a player that you're gambling on. Sure, they have tremendous talent, and some of them may be just misunderstood. We all were young at one point, may have done some things that you don't want to be, publicly known. And unfortunately, these guys live in that era where it's going to be publicly known. So I think it's to each his own. I really do. If you're an organization like this organization here, I know for a fact sitting in the draft, sitting at Redskins Park during the draft, I know for a fact that they were really concerned about some character issues with some guys. And the guy that just kept coming up over and over was Caleb Brantley, from Florida. Tremendous football player, but he kept falling and falling and falling because some teams just don't want to deal with what the legal situation could be with him, punching a female, knocking her tooth out, just that whole thing. If you look at Peppers and you look at Foster, I can't put them in the same category as far as the urine test, as far as, the diluted urine samples. You can't do that because Foster's had some other issues. I think Peppers, it looked kind of funny, obviously fishy as far as maybe is the word I'm using, as far as if he did smoke, which most people tend to pretty much think, yeah, that's what happened. There are a lot of guys that smoke in the NFL, Josh. I don't think that's a hidden secret. And we're talking about some high-end talented guys too. So that's a whole nother issue for a whole nother day. I don't attest that to character issues. I really don't. I don't smoke, never have, never will. But the point is, I know people that do, and I don't judge, and I don't think that's an issue. But if you're talking about domestic issues or you're talking about, any kind of criminal acts, yeah, you might want to draw a flag, and draw a line in the sand on how far you're willing to go to bring a talent in.
All right, I got to get to the Wizards here with you, Lake, because
Sure.
I'm watching the game last night, and I kind of excused game one as, well, Morris went down. They really weren't prepared for that. Okay, things happen. Last night, I felt like I was watching John Wall and the Wizards reminds me of Kevin Garnett on the Timberwolves years ago. You have a guy who is very talented, a guy who can do many things, but the team really hasn't placed comparable talent around him. I feel like we basically drank Kool-Aid all year long on Bradley Beal and Otto Porter because both of these guys just haven't really developed into the complementary talent that John Wall really needs. And you see a team that they're playing in Boston who the players around them are supporting what Isaiah Thomas does and what he does best, whereas the Wizards, you see that John Wall is trying to do things. He's trying to get his teammates involved, but they're not fulfilling their end of the deal.
Yeah, you're 100% correct with that. It's two things that jump out about what's going on in the series. Yes, Wall can't do everything all the time. And I think some guys have gotten in watch mode. They're just watching and waiting for him to save them and bail them out. And you're playing the number one seed. It's going to be different from playing Atlanta. There's just no getting around that. I think what we're seeing too is Scotty Brooks is known as a talent, a guy that really molds and develops young talent. And there's no coincidence that Otto Porter and Bradley Beal had their best years as pros this year under Scotty Brooks. So he brought out some things in their game that we weren't seeing before. But with that said, Scotty Brooks is also known as a guy that has been out-coached in some playoffs. And I'm seeing it right now. I mean, yeah, Bradley Beal's not doing his part. Things could change if he makes a couple baskets. But for the life of me, I'm looking at, a 5'8", 5'9" player, as great as Isaiah Thomas is, there's no way that you let him take it easy on the defensive end of the court. I mean, he's on the other side checking Kelly Oubre, Otto Porter, guys that are 6'7" through 6'9", and they're not posting him up or even trying to. You've got to make him work on the other end of the court so that he doesn't have that offensive explosion going on like he did yesterday. He still could have played 2 more overtimes because he wasn't tired, because he didn't have to do anything on defense. That goes back to Scotty Brooks, and the Wizards are going to have to make adjustments. And going back to Wall, there's this element that I'm seeing with the Wizards that Wall he's an elite player now. I mean, I don't think that's something that is hidden outside of this mark. I'm sure you guys see this guy's ascending to superstar status. He is. But with that said, I don't know if Bradley Beal is the running mate for him. And I truly believe that. I think that they may need a more hyper athletic type of two guard, someone like a Malik Monk or someone coming out of college, coming out of Kentucky. They need someone that can create their own shot as well and not just be a spot-up shooter. Because Bradley Beal, when that shot's not falling, I don't know what else you get from him. And you definitely didn't get anything from him yesterday.
Well, you got turnovers from him. You get that, so.
A little bit too much. I mean, he just looked yesterday like he looked worse than a rookie. I mean,
he was lost up creek without a paddle last night.
Yeah, he did. I mean, he's throwing the ball I didn't know who I was watching, and I've been critical of Bradley Beal in this market. I have. I've called him soft. I've called him a lot of different things. And nice kid. Don't get me wrong. Sweet stroke to his shot, but nice and sweet stroke don't mean anything to me come playoff time, and you're getting $130 million. You've got to produce, and you got to give a little bit more than 12 points. He missed a lot of big shots. The shot end of regulation, I mean, he didn't even draw iron on that. That was basically a free throw. And I was telling a friend of mine, he jumped.
Right.
And he still threw up an air ball. So mentally, I'm not going to say that he checked out. That's harsh to say that about a professional. But let's just say he never checked in. How about that?
All right, that's fair. One more thing before I let you go. I look at the Wizards, and I look at this offseason. They're not going to have a lottery pick in the top 10 unless something crazy happens, like a trade or something.
They don't even have
insane.
a first-round draft pick, actually.
Oh, they don't even have – that's right. Didn't they trade that for Bogdanovich?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So they don't have a first-round pick. So they're totally reliant on free agency and trades to improve this team. A third of the entire free agent market is point guards. So you already can rule them out. Another portion of the free agent market are big men. You already got Gortat and Morris. I don't think they're really the problem at this point. You're limited to guys like Dion Waiters out there to hopefully maybe add something to this team. Is there really a way in the next couple of years that you foresee the Wizards improving this team, or are they pretty much stuck with what they got?
I'm so glad you asked this question. Literally had this conversation this morning. The name that I would somehow, and I've never really been a huge fan of his game because I think, unfortunately, to me, he's a black hole. You get the ball to him, you don't get it back. But I think for this team, they need a third will, and I mean a prominent third will that could actually be your second will, and Bill now would become the third will. I think a guy like Carmelo Anthony could be that big free guy that could really give this team what they need. They need a scorer on the wing. They do. They need. I mean, Porter's a really good 3-point shooter, but he's just not aggressive. That's just not his game. They need someone that's going to demand a double team every now and then. And you can already see that Wall creates his own shots. No one can cover him in front of him. But at the end of the day, you're asking a guy that's really a pass-first point guard to put up 40 a night. That's not good. And you already know Bill's going to go missing sometimes. So you have to have someone else now that can carry the load with Wall. And if all three of them are clicking, then, they could be a deadly team. So I think a guy like, Carmelo Anthony could be a guy that perhaps could be in play. But it would, let's face it, Carmelo would have to take a pay cut. And in today's NBA, a pay cut could still get him $110 million, So I think he has to understand, too, that he's no longer the alpha dog anymore on anybody's team wherever he goes at this point. And you have to ask yourself, does he want to win or does he want to make money? So what would the Wizards have to give up for him? Maybe a future first rounder, and
don't bet on it. You're talking about Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson is not exactly the greatest GM in the world. He'll give you more than he'll get.
Right. They might be able to fleece him, right? So yeah, a guy like that could be.
Phil might give you a first round pick to take Carmelo off his hands.
Yeah, I'll throw another name out there that. I haven't heard anything, but I do know that last year, in the offseason, there was some talk that he was going to get moved. And there was even some talk up to the trade deadline this year. Maybe a guy like Jimmy Butler. I mean, maybe a guy like that could come in and be that complement that they need. And I think if they did something like that, now you're talking about a championship caliber basketball team. The other question that needs to be just said here on your show is, I'm not sold that John Wall's coming back here next year. I hear things, and I know the kid's frustrated. So depending on how this series turns out, I mean, if they get swept, it could be interesting. Let's just put it that way. Even though they're not far away, and this is the first year under this coach, and they've turned the corner, as a respectable team nationally. I just know the guy's frustrated. He wants to win.
Well, with that bomb at the end, I'll wrap it up on that note. Lake Lewis, he covers the Redskins for a long time for USA Today. You can follow him on Twitter at Lake Lewis. He's a great follow, not just for the Redskins and Wizards, but for sports as a whole. Lake, appreciate the time today.
Thanks a lot, Josh. I appreciate it. You did a good job, man.
I have my moments in the sun.
You have to relax after this and exhale, man. But you did a good job, though. Appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate it. Lake Lewis, everybody.